my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Branko van Oppen, who is presenting his fourth and final lecture this afternoon. Hopefully, most of you in the audience have had a chance to see all of these thoughtful and very brilliant lectures that Branko has been delivering, I think, since about September. The first one you might remember was a proposal for an exhibition with the artist Nikos Stratakis. The second lecture focused on the Joseph B. Noble collection and Branko's reinterpretation or interest in providing a fresh look at that collection through different scientific examinations. The third lecture, which was about 3 weeks ago, was focused on Minoan Knossos. And today's lecture, as you already know that you're on today's lecture, is about identity and antiquity, which will be, I'm sure, a fascinating topic. If you are new to this series, Branko is a distinguished curator and scholar based in the Netherlands. He studied at the City University of New York with Dr. Sarah Pomeroy, and we just couldn't be more thrilled that he is joining us again for just kind of wonderful insight on the Tampa Museum of Art's Antiquities collection. So with that, I will invite Branko to join us. All right. And while we wait a moment for Branko's camera to turn on, I'll remind you that we have our Antiquities collection is almost always on permanent view at the museum. This past summer, my colleague Brittany Bevel, who gave the introduction just a moment ago, and our colleague Cassandra Abel curated a very beautiful show titled Her Story, Ancient Heroines and Everyday Women in Antiquity. And that show will be on view until July of 2021, I believe. So we have a nice long run on that. So if you haven't been to the museum, come see our current shows and take a new look at our Antiquities collection. I think, oh, maybe Branko is having some connection issues. We are also, just to give you a little bit of a brief background, so you all know that I'm the curator of modern and contemporary art, and we have fully opened our fall and winter exhibitions. So if you haven't had a chance to come to the museum and you're looking for something to do during the holiday season, I encourage you to visit the museum, especially this time of year. It's just beautiful downtown. The lights in Curtis Dixon are on, and it's just a great chance to see the Florida Highwaymen exhibition that we just opened, and a permanent collection exhibition focused in on figuration and portraiture. So it looks like we have Branko back with us. Good afternoon, or good evening, Branko.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. I had a little technical glitch. Don't know what happened there, but thank you for your kind words. Would you like to finish your sentence? I think you were in the
you know, I think that's all set. We are eager to hear your presentation today, so I'm going to turn it directly over to you.
Well, thank you, Joanna. And well, of course, thank you all for joining us today. This is indeed the fourth lecture that I'm giving this fall. And in this webinar today, I would like to pitch another proposal for an exhibition, this time focused on identity in classical antiquity, with particular attention to issues of ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. Before I start, though, I would want to thank the team at the TMA for their unfailing support and assistance, providing background information and images while I am working from home across the Atlantic, 6 time zones away. I would like to take this moment also to congratulate Brittany Bevel and Cassandra Abel for their excellent achievement putting together the exhibition Her Story, Ancient Heroines and Everyday Women. Now, in modern philosophy, psychology, and the social sciences, various expressions of identity are recognized, such as personal, social, and national identity. Certain frames of identity are well defined or fixed. Others are a matter of personal choice or can change over time. Think of economic class and social status, education and profession, culture and nationality, race or ethnicity. Also, languages, family, lifestyle, musical preference, sexual orientation, political allegiance, or religion. These frames of identity may invoke a sense of belonging or form exclusive alliances. They may also provoke feelings of marginalization, even policies of segregation, or demands for acceptation and equal treatment. In this fourth and final Antiquities lecture this fall, I would like to propose an exhibition concept about this theme of identity in the classical world. The talk will therefore first address these issues of gender, sexuality, and ethnicity, and that will be followed by further particulars of the actual exhibition proposal. As Brittany mentioned, if during this talk you have questions, use the raise hand function, write your questions in the comments. You may wish to speak or type, whichever it is you prefer. There is room for questions during the presentation and afterwards as well. So with that all set, I would say, let us begin. So in classical antiquity, I think we need to slide to the next. No, we're good. Sorry, Victoria. In classical antiquity, expressions of identity could not be articulated explicitly because the terminology for voicing thoughts about personal, cultural, and national frames of identity did not exist. That is not to say that Egyptians or Persians, Greeks or Romans did not experience a sense of belonging to a certain ethnic group that shared a cultural, linguistic, and historical heritage. They obviously recognized biological differences between men and women and believed that certain social roles naturally belonged to the different genders. Ancient societies were unambiguously patriarchal and hierarchical, with certain political rights held as privileges of well-defined classes to the exclusion of others, such as slaves, peasants, women, and/or resident aliens, even when this last class of people lived in the country for generations. It goes without saying that ancient people recognized the physical, biological differences between men and women. In terms of body ideals, however, most, if not all, ancient cultures appear to have understood the male physique as the norm and a woman's body as the deviation from that norm. Certainly, the famous Greek philosopher Aristotle presented the male body as the model. Some awareness about what is now conceived as intersex genders existed, as is best illustrated by the mythic figure of Hermaphroditus, the child of Hermes and Aphrodite, who exhibited both female breasts and male genitals. While actual hermaphrodite children will likely have been exposed after birth, to the best of my knowledge, no ancient historical examples are known. The mythic two-sexed figure expressed the best of both masculine and feminine genders and was believed to be the perfect embodiment of a happy marriage in Greco-Roman thought. In general, and with the risk of overgeneralization, women in classical antiquity were able to perform only a limited number of roles throughout their lives, that of a virgin daughter, a chaste wife, a modest but influential mother, and if she survived long enough, a respected matron of the family. In essence, everyone in antiquity was born in the socioeconomic class of their parents with little to no chance of advancement. Except for the wealthiest elites, girls received little or no education. Throughout the ancient Mediterranean, girls were normally married in their teens, say between 12 and 18 years old, somewhat older for noble or royal families. Generally to a man twice their age, about 25 through 30 years old. Often within her near family, that means uncle or cousin or something. Few women could inherit their family's estate, could become a benefactress to their city, sponsor chariot races at international competitions, or become a priestess. Apart from supporting their family in trade, crafts, or farming, they could sell themselves as a prostitute, say a high-class hetaira, that is a female companion or an escort, on all male drinking parties, or a common porne, a sex worker. Women could be dancers or musicians. Others were enslaved or sold into slavery at an early age, most from the indigenous population of the Black Sea area. This could also happen through piracy or from prisoners of war, but note that slaves rarely came from Africa. In ancient patriarchal society, men could quite naturally contribute much more to public and political life and much less to private and family life. Like girls, boys were born in the class and status of their parents with little to no expectation of socio-economic advancement. They were first and foremost considered sons, then husbands, and eventually fathers and heads of their households. There were more opportunities for education and for physical exercise. In most societies, the eldest son inherited the estate after his father's passing. At the lowest end of the social spectrum, men would be peasants or day laborer, artisan or merchant like their father before them. Men could make a name for themselves as athlete or soldier, artist or poet, actor or musician, author or philosopher. They could often participate in politics as jurors or advocates, statesmen or generals. Men could use their wealth and influence as benefactors and priests, sponsoring international competitions and celebrated artists. States like Egypt and Persia, Sparta and Macedon, Etruscan cities or Rome in certain periods were ruled by kings or even by emperors. Still, men could also end up as slaves elsewhere. Even Julius Caesar was briefly kidnapped by Cilician pirates on the threat of enslavement. Still, ancient people also recognized that certain phenomena did not fit easily within their often binary categories and definitions of identity. Greeks particularly seem to have enjoyed exploring aspects of ambivalence. Take this ceramic box for storing jewelry and cosmetics called pyxis. The scene of the body of the vase depicts an undressed figure with hair nicely done up and bedecked with jewels, kneeling before a washing basin, holding a drapery and a mirror. But look closer to the relevant details of the body, and you will see that this is a young man, not a woman. And when we open the lid of the pyxis and see that the compartments each have their own lid, we see that one has the head of a young woman, another with the head of a boy, and the larger one with a standing actor. In the ancient world, it was considered shameful for women to perform on the public stage. The pyxis, I would imagine, once belonged to an actor who also played female roles, but the man in question seems also to have enjoyed dressing up. By the way, this might be a good time to ask if there are questions already on the Zoom chat or on Facebook that I could answer.
I think we're good.
All right, thank you, Brittany. Then let's move on to the theme of sexuality. Very little is known about the thoughts and attitudes of the average person about sex and sexuality across the ancient Mediterranean of any region or period. Even the literate elites wrote little about the subject. Consequently, it remains impossible to know whether a commoner, peasant, or craftsman held the same beliefs and prejudices as the aristocrats who had the leisure to write down their thoughts, or the artists who created the wonderful works of art that have survived and continue to inspire us today. It must be emphasized in this respect that female nudity was not the norm or even the ideal in ancient cultures until the Hellenistic period, that is, from about the reign of Alexander the Great, who ruled from 336 to 323 before the Common Era. And then only under certain circumstances. Throughout, respected women were expected to be chaste and modest, covered in long pleated dresses, and their heads often covered with a veil. The Athenian sculptor Praxiteles, who lived about a generation before Alexander the Great, was the first to fashion a life-size statue of a female nude, namely the goddess Aphrodite. Sources mention that Praxiteles was commissioned to create a statue of the goddess for the people of Kos and offered them one draped and the other nude. When the people of Kos chose the former as more appropriate, the people of Knidos purchased the other one and placed it in a temple so that it could be admired from all sides. The Aphrodite of Knidos became a tourist attraction for centuries to come. In antiquity, goddesses like Inanna, Ishtar, Astarte, Hathor, Aphrodite or Venus could reveal themselves in all their naked glory. But this nudity remained erotically titillating, sexually fascinating, as well as dangerously powerful. Egyptian tradition particularly rejoiced in the juxtapositions of violence and sexuality, vengeance and benevolence, motherhood and promiscuity in the worship of goddesses such as Tefnut, Sekhmet, Bastet, Neith, Hathor, and Isis. The extent to which this religious sentiment was applicable to historical women, notably queens, is debated. Male nudity was a different matter altogether. Centuries of museum displays of male and female nudity have desensitized the public, but in antiquity, the erotic sexual nature of nudity was always present. And remember that the nuance between nude and naked is a luxury only English can afford. In Greek art especially, the athletic male body was glorified as the beauty ideal. Sexuality, or sexual preference, has become an issue of personal identity in contemporary society after centuries of stigmatization and criminalization. In antiquity, however, neither the state nor society seem to have interfered in sexual activities, for good or for bad. Women were ideally married as virgin, but how much this really mattered is questionable. They were expected to remain faithful, predominantly for the sake of maintaining the lineage and family honor. Men were not expected to uphold such lofty standards. They were free to entertain mistresses, misuse, abuse, or otherwise use male or female slaves, and maintain relationships with boys. To reiterate, in Greco-Roman antiquity, men, married men, were not and could not be chastised for homosexual or pedophile relations. And at least in Athenian art and literature, these relations are described with loving care and detail. Such sexual feelings, however, appear not to have been part of Greek male identity. Only the poetess Sappho of Lesbos, who lived about 630 to 570 BCE, offers evidence of similarly delicate homoerotic feelings towards girls with a similar age difference among Greek male society, And bisexuality is actually a modern response to the heteronormative attitude, ignoring the fluidity of polyamorous experiences in ancient times. And then there are the orgies, if you'll pardon me this indulgence. The term derives from the Greek orgia, a secret rite in the mystery cult of Dionysus, Orpheus, Demeter, and other deities. The symposia, the famous Greek all-male drinking party with entertainment provided by Hetairae and or Pornae, included riotous behavior, music and dancing, drunkenness and public shaming. To what extent elite men did indeed engage in the kind of indiscriminate sexual activity as depicted here remains difficult to assess. These vase fragments, a source of great hilarity for schoolboys visiting the TMA, are on loan at the museum from the Zawadzki collection. In Greek myth and religion, Dionysus represented the other. He crossed literal and figurative borders and boundaries. His cult allowed his followers to explore ambivalences, crossing and blending categories, transcending cultural and social constraints, and so forth. This scene is an example of cross-dressing. If you look closely, you will see that the two figures flanking the central woman playing the lyre wear the same dress as her, but they clearly have beards. The stamnos was a gift of Mr. and Mrs. Sawatsky. One more slide on the topic of sexuality, if I may, to reiterate the earlier observation that Greek and Roman artists enjoyed exploring sexual ambivalences. Here is again Hermaphroditus, the child of Hermes and Aphrodite, with sexual organs of both genders. The effeminate figurine of Eros on the right seems to exhibit pubescent gynecomastia, that is, the enlargement of breasts. On the marvelous bell crater in the center, also on loan from the Sawatsky collection, but currently not on display in the galleries, if I am right, we see the god Dionysus in long oriental feminine robes, reclining with a wine cup in his hand, while one of his female followers, a Maenad, dances before him. Again, this may be an appropriate time to pause. I see that there are 2 comments in the chat, but I cannot read them. Brittany, is there anything I can address at the moment?
No questions. One of the comments just pointed that this is an important exhibition.
Well, that is very nice to hear. Then I will move on to the third topic, ethnicity, and begin by saying that the term race may be a term that is best avoided, for it has associations with violent racism and radical nationalism. Still, it is likely that most ancient peoples, Sumerians and Assyrians, Egyptians and Persians, Phoenicians and Hebrews, Greeks and Romans, Celts and Germans, among many other peoples, understood the similarities and differences between different peoples, and that they might consider that similar as the word race might convey, or some kind of unvarying ethnicity. But let's take the Greeks as an example. It is important to begin by emphasizing that they did not call themselves Greeks. That is an ancient Latin term. They called themselves and still call themselves Hellenes. Also important to note that they were never an independent, unified nation in antiquity. They did recognize that they spoke closely related dialects of the same language, shared a cultural heritage, and worshiped gods by the same name. Yet they also understood the movement of people over time, from across the Balkans into the peninsula, from the mainland to the Aegean Islands, the Asian Minor Coast, and the Black Sea shore, as well as across the Adriatic to southern Italy, Sicily, and beyond. Yet they also believed that some Greek peoples were autochthonous and had thus lived in the same area since the dawn of time. This masterful wine cup, now in Berlin, expresses this mythic notion beautifully, because you see here in the center Gaia, Mother Earth, giving birth to the legendary Athenian king Erychthonios. When displaying various expressions of ethnicity, it is important to convey to the visitor the differences between self-identification, that is to say, portrayals of peoples by themselves, and depictions by one people of another. For in the latter case, an element of ethnocentric othering might be at play, deliberately or unconsciously. For obvious reasons, it will not be possible to show portraits of every different ethnic group, and even a careful selection will create distortions. In the following, I can therefore only show an exceedingly small selection. Taking the Greeks again as example, it is clear that a cultural affinity was felt with the peoples living in Italy, even if they spoke different languages. Egyptian civilization was revered for its cultural achievements, and Egyptian gods were equated with Greek counterparts. For political reasons, the Persians became the ultimate other, emphasizing differences as examples how things should not be in the Greek world. The Scythians, nomadic tribes, or actually a group of nomadic tribes that lived in Central Europe and Central Asia, were likewise presented as mirror images of Greek culture and an inspiration for myths about the Amazons. The inhabitants of the shore of the Black Sea were also considered naturally suitable for slavery. Celts, also known as Gauls, and Germans were feared and loathed for their uncouth barbarian habits, yet by praising their barbarian bravery, Hellenistic kings and Roman generals could celebrate even more glorious victories. Black Africans were both admired for their beauty and derided as uncivilized oddities. For us, the difficulty is that few instances of self-representation of Black Africans survive from antiquity. The images of the Kushite pharaohs ruling over Egypt from Nubia are probably the only secure examples. Also look at the stunning portrait of Queen Tiye, the chief royal wife of Amenhotep III, and thus the mother of Akhenaton and the grandmother of Tutankhamun. There is no indication in her lineage of Nubian ancestors. From her mother Chuyu's side, she was related to the royal house, and her father is of unknown background, and if he was not a native Egyptian, it is speculated that his family may have been from Mitanni, which is in the northern Levant. The matter becomes more complicated when dealing with the Greco-Roman portrayal of Black people. There are, to be sure, some masterful representations of Black figures that reveal an admiration or at least an honest study of African individuals. But truly troublesome are the stereotyping, caricaturing, or derogatory depictions of Black men and women. Very few paintings survive from any period or region of antiquity, and most sculptures have lost their original layer of pigment, often purposely washed off in modern times for supposedly aesthetic reasons. The general absence of color removes one significant, though literally superficial, layer of ethnicity, namely shades of skin complexion. Greek black and red figure vase paintings occasionally show women with white skin, but rarely draw differences in skin color for ethnical reasons. Only in the case of Black Africans was a deliberate contrast drawn with the white or reddish-brown complexion of Greek men and women. The painted mummy portraits, such as you see here, of Roman Egypt, give the clearest impression of the great ethnic diversity and cultural entanglements of the time. In addition to making sure that the exhibition includes depictions from within various cultural spheres, as well as representing othering, such as the Scythians, Amazons, and Black Africans, it is essential to illustrate that ancient artists, indeed in most if not all ancient cultures, employed other features to portray cultural and ethnic diversity. A beautiful example of this is the Apulian red figure column crater attributed to the Maplewood painter, depicting a standing Apulian warrior and an Oscan horseman. They are both recognizable by their headwear and their costume. The funerary altar erected in honor of Dionysus at Ostia, the freedman of the wealthy merchant Lucius Catullius, portrays the deceased in toga and fashionable Roman hairstyle. Yet Dionysus hailed from Greece, and the Cautili may themselves have come to Italy as slaves from Asia Minor. Ethnicity may thus also be an identity that individuals could adopt, depending on their circumstances. Brittany, I again see a Q&A and a chat lighting up that I can't read. Is there anything that I can address before moving to the next section?
Yes, we have two questions. The first, how would female rulers like Cleopatra have been viewed? An anomaly?
Not really. From a Roman point of view, yes, because in Rome they were not accustomed to women having power. In the Ptolemaic dynasty, something that I will talk about a little bit next month, queenship was becoming very normal, probably from the first or at least the second generation of that dynasty that ruled after the death of Alexander the Great in Egypt. Women started to become more and more powerful. So Cleopatra is the last scion of that dynasty, and perhaps the most powerful woman of her time. But yeah, from a Greek point of view, or from a Persian point of view, from a Roman point of view, it was certainly an anomaly.
And then we have a question as well as a hand raised, but the question first. Do you have any intention of introducing any parallel ideas arising in the Americas, or is this too far afield for the purposes of your proposal?
I will go into the proposal after this. And one of the things that I will say is that I don't want to dilute the message. So it is important to incorporate references to contemporary society. Otherwise, what is the relevance of antiquity? But it has to be done in a different way, that I think, than by presenting contemporary objects into the exhibition. But certainly, I think that there are ways with text or with guided tours or specific events where you can draw out some of the themes that we're talking about, and then consider how they are significant in our modern day and how they can help us understand not only antiquity, but also our own ideas.
Thank you. And then we have a hand raised from Dr. Bianchi, so I'm going to allow him to talk.
Hi, Bob.
And Dr. Bianchi, you will have to unmute yourself.
That's all the way in the left button.
No, I apologize. That was a mistake on my part. I hit the wrong button.
Hi, Bob. Go ahead.
No, as I mentioned, it was an error. I had a glitch in my computer screen.
Oh, okay. So you didn't have a comment or a question?
Correct.
Okie doke. Thank you. So with that, let me move on to the proposal itself. An exhibition on identity would, I think, be highly appropriate in the current socio-political climate, in which minorities continue demanding equal rights in the face of persistent discrimination, marginalization, and systemic violence. An exhibition on identity in classical antiquity, however, does pose some challenges of conveying modern notions that remained unrecognized or were understood differently in ancient times, and were felt differently in different periods in different regions. As you saw, the preceding presentation has focused as much as possible on the permanent antiquities collection of the TMA. I have incorporated examples from other institutions when important themes could not be illustrated with objects from the Tampa Museum of Art. A careful observer will have noticed several objects from the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. One or two other museums, I believe, could easily be suggested for planning a touring exhibition based on the combined collections. I should emphasize at this point that the TMA has not been in contact with any external parties. This exhibition proposal is centered around three themes of identity in classical antiquity: ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. The chief aim of the proposed project is to draw attention to issues of identity, its permeability, differences between ancient and modern times, and thus engage the visitor in discussions about sensitive, if not controversial, topics such as race and sex, nationalism and discrimination, women's place in society, and man's contribution to family life. As such, the exhibition will offer ample opportunities for relevant and timely outreach programs, for dialogues about the importance of equal opportunities for all, mutual understanding, and also for increasing the TMA's profile in the local community and at the national level. While audio-visual applications may be a welcome supplement to the exhibition, the present proposal basically relies on a traditional presentation of objects and informative labels. Beyond educational programs, outreach efforts could include the Greek and Italian, African and Latin communities of the greater Tampa Bay area, as well as the general LGBTQ communities. Indeed, the mission should be to embrace the widest possible range of diversity and inclusivity. Lectures within the framework of the Antiquities Circle could perhaps be scheduled to invite speakers such as Sarah Pomeroy, Professor Emerita at Hunter College and the Graduate School of the City University of New York, Elizabeth Carney at Emory University, Lloyd Llewellyn Jones from Cardiff University, Jackie Murray of the University of Kentucky, and Sarah Bond at the University of Iowa to discuss topics such as women, queenship, sexuality, and the whitewashing of the classics. The TMA's permanent collection of ancient Greek and Roman art is of unquestionable merit. Nevertheless, the present proposal has brought certain lacunae to light, such as the absence of any depictions of important goddesses such as Demeter, Ceres, Artemis, Diana, and Hera, Juno, while Aphrodite, or her counterparts Venus or Chiron, and Minerva, that is Athena, are well attested in the collection. Aspects of women's lives, such as motherhood and childhood, are likewise generally absent. Practically no erotic scenes exist in the collection, with the exception of a single coin and a set of shirts on loan from the Zawadzki collection. And there is certainly no hint of homoeroticism apart from the androgynous Dionysus. The present proposal offers a very generalized view of identity. I'm very well of that. And the focus is very much on classical Greece. And when you say classical Greece, that's actually ancient Athens, because that is where most of the relevant collection, as well as most of the surviving evidence, derives from. A more balanced presentation that would include the ancient Near East, Sumeria, Assyria, Persia, etc., as well as ancient Egypt, would require partner institutions with the relevant collection and expertise. And while it would create a more comprehensive and inclusive presentation, it might also complicate the narrative and perhaps even dilute it. The simplest solution would be to shift the focus more explicitly to classical Greece and Rome. For sharing the financial burden, so important in these difficult times, with other national and international institutions, and for ensuring the development of an equitable exhibition partnership, I would suggest collaborating with a number of organizations. Some of these may eventually even become recurrent or long-term partners in a more or less formal consortium for future projects. As we saw, I am thinking especially of a collaboration with the Boston MFA as co-producing venue. I imagine that the TMA could be able to persuade one or two other venues to join the project. On a North American level, the Metropolitan Museum of Arts in New York and the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto might be considered as well. Internationally, the TMA could find partners in the Dutch National Museum of Antiquities in Leiden or the Archaeological Museum of Mykonos in Greece. Moreover, we should not forget the greater Tampa Bay community. The exhibition will offer scores of opportunities for outreach programs and collaborative events. I believe it would be imperative to work closely together with the Equality Florida Advocacy Group and the Tampa chapter of Black Lives Matter, Tampa Bay SAGE and the Tampa Bay LGBT Chamber, the Crisis Center Women in Action and the National Organization for Women, as well as the Intercultural Student Leadership Conference at the University of South Florida. Additionally, I would like to reach out to local communities such as the Greek community in Tarpon Springs. Again, before I wrap up, are there any questions, comments, suggestions at this point that I could address?
A follow-up to one of the previous questions. They were specifically interested in whether ancient or pre-modern Native American ideas about these topics might merit inclusion in this discussion based on the cultural context of Tampa and Florida.
I am no expert in this field, and therefore I personally would feel it's difficult for me to incorporate that. it's not an idea that I had in my mind, but it's certainly something that is worth considering to see if that would work out and how we would go about doing that. It's certainly a very interesting idea. So anything else? Other questions?
Not at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Brittany. So then let me conclude. The purpose of today's Antiquities lecture was to pitch a proposal to you for an exhibition on identity in classical antiquity. For the Tampa Museum of Art, the proposed exhibition will offer the excellent opportunity to address issues of identity that are relevant in our own contemporary society. The exhibition will allow the museum to convey that these issues are not necessarily new and have been understood differently in different times and places. Indeed, racism, sexism, homophobia, and other forms of discrimination are outcrops of the modern nation state more than anything. That is not to say that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have not held homophobic tenets for centuries, or that ethnocentric prejudices did not exist in the ancient world. Patriarchic societies, by definition, devalue the role of women by generally delegating them to the domestic sphere. On an institutional, systematic, structural level, however, identity discrimination is a modern phenomenon. I would like to close by reiterating what I have said before, that the ancient world in general continues to inspire and educate us about art and religion, cultural exchange and ethnic diversity, and many other subjects. The beautiful artifacts on display in the Tampa Museum of Art can thus teach us lessons that remain profoundly relevant today. Please continue to patronize the TMA, to wander around the museum, and to wonder about the ancient, modern, and contemporary art on display. Feel free to connect in your own personal way with the objects. I can especially recommend the Her Story exhibition that, of course, touches on some of the same issues as today's lecture, namely women's identity in the ancient world. So thank you for your attention. It has been a great pleasure to propose this exhibition concept to you. I hope we may soon meet each other in person. And if you have questions, I believe there should be ample time for that. I personally would be very interested hearing your thoughts about the feasibility of this proposal, if you would be interested in visiting this exhibition, and whether you have any questions for improvement. That was it.
We have another raised hand. It's Dr.
Sure.
Bianchi again.
Branko, thank you for what is a very, very provocative and challenging exhibition. I would, however, agree that because the subject is so complex, a narrow focus on the classical world would probably be the most expedient way to articulate all of the points made, particularly since Western civilization is so much indebted to the classical world. You might want to bring in Egypt and Mesopotamia as peripheral, but I think doing so would dilute the message that you're trying to make. So I would certainly endorse your suggestion that less is more, and a narrow focus would drive the points home very, very emphatically.
Thank you for confirming this feeling that I had myself. Of course, the TMA has a certain set square of space available for changing exhibitions. It might, of course, be possible to have something happen in one of the other galleries that might be related more closely to the Americas or to contemporary society that is on the same topic, but is not incorporated within the same exhibition. But it is a very broad topic, and I think that there are also difficulties of finding the objects that relate to this theme whether they exist in other cultures is something that I am not an expert in. And so we would have to bring in someone else who could advise us to that respect. Any other questions? Here, popping up, there is there's always an opportunity to reach out to Brittany or anyone else at the museum, and if you have questions directly for me, they will forward it. But you will also be able to find me very easily on the internet.
Branko, thank you. As people start to populate the chat with a few more comments, Brittany, hope you don't mind, I'm just going to jump in here. There's a question on how people can contact you. And I think I'm going to leave that up to Brittany to share information on that. And our executive director, Dr. Michael Toomore, said there's also the opportunity to make this a 3-part program. So I think that's also a really interesting idea.
Certainly.
Branko, just a couple follow-up questions for you on my end. The Antiquity Circle and its kind of counterpart, well, maybe not counterpart, kind of membership circle that coexists with Antiquity Circle, our Tampa Collects group. One thing that we've been focusing on and trying to educate each other about are these opportunities to collect and how we fill in some of those gaps in the collection. So you mentioned in this lecture that we are missing some very key women, key goddesses in the collection. How would we go about, I mean, I sort of know, but how would you have your eye on one of these objects that's maybe out on the market or available for donation? How might we go about finding and filling in that gap with some of those women that are missing?
Yeah, well, there tends to be 2 or 3 different ways. One would be to sponsor excavation campaigns from colleagues at the other museum or university, and hope that some of these objects might be unearthed and then come into the collection. That is a very safe way, but you will never know what you will receive from archaeological excavations, and objects might be very boring for a visitor, and they might not fill in the lacunae that I mentioned. An obvious way would be the art market that you point out. The antiquities market is fraught with ethical questions. You need to know for certain what the provenance is, how people acquired the object, was it illicitly unearthed, or does it have a wartime history, questions like that. And the art market also has very high prices that for that the museum would need to acquire acquisition funds. And the third option is like the person I've mentioned several times today, Bill Zawadzki, and similar collectors in the area who share a passion and who might, through all the lectures and exhibitions that we have, become interested in these kinds of questions, that they might find ways to acquire objects that eventually will be gifted or presented on loan, such as people like, of course, the Perry family, Lemonopoulos, and Zawadzki have done. The good fortune, as the museum had in 1986, to acquire the Nobel collection for an amount of money that in that time you could perhaps buy one painting for. I think those times are gone.
Excellent. And then my other question I was thinking about, as you're giving your presentation, is that you have presented for kind of very different topics to us over the course of the past several weeks. What was, and I hope this doesn't put you on the spot too much, was there anything in researching TMA's collection that really surprised you in terms of either, you know, an object or two that you found, or even more gaps that you discovered, or just in general, some of your observations about now kind of delving into the collection? I know that's a very big kind of open-ended question.
Yeah, there are so many things, but of course, when I started preparing and started to learn about the TMA, the first and nicest surprise was the head of a Ptolemaic queen that I will give a shorter talk about next month. That felt like meeting old family that you didn't know you were going to come across. The collection has beautiful objects, and some of these are very surprising, and some of them, when you start to research them and talk about them with colleagues like Brittany or Bob Bianchi or Bill Zawadzki, they start to come alive, and you start to ask yourself questions that you hadn't done before. And yeah, the difficulty, of course, is that you cannot discuss all of that on a lecture like this, but the pyxis with the 3 lids in the interior compartments with the head of a boy and the head of a woman and an actor leads you to wonder, why would an actor need makeup? Similar compartmentalized faces have been found with traces of makeup still in it. An actor wears a mask in Greek theater. So why would he need makeup if he is wearing a mask? Some of these compartments may have been used for trinkets, for jewelry, bracelets, and what have you. Maybe a wig, who knows? But why is there a compartment for a young boy? What kind of things would be in there? Those kinds of questions are very fascinating. And it means that despite centuries of research, there are still questions that remain open that I would love to discuss more with experts, and hope that these kinds of thoughts will enrich not only me, but will enrich the visitor's experience.
Fantastic. I do have a question for you, and maybe even some of the our guests attending today, maybe Dr. Bianchi or Mr. Zawadzki can help answer this, is why do you think, with the Noble collection being such a prominent component of the Antiquities collection, in any of your research, and you've mentioned this briefly to me, do you have any thoughts on why there aren't more pieces from that collection that are dedicated to this topic of identity and
well, I do not know, of course, Mr. Noble. Some of it may be that he was more interested in different kinds of techniques, styles, and shapes than he was interested in the scenes that they represent. So one of the things that he liked was a vase that had the same scene on the front and the back. So it didn't really matter what that scene was, but the duplication he felt interesting, because then you can compare if an artist makes changes even though he is painting the same scene. But I imagine that the absence of erotic and sexual scenes is something that he felt uncomfortable with. He had these images at home, where he lived with his wife. It may have been something that he didn't feel was part of his private life. That it may also be just the luck of the draw, the objects that you come across for acquiring, and that maybe he would have wanted, say, an object with Demeter and Persephone on it. There are famous scenes of the underworld that aren't in the collection. So that may be just the fact that he, while he was purchasing artifacts, did not come across, or were too expensive. Someone else bought it before him. I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly, but part of it may simply be a blind spot.
I think what's been really fascinating was just the way that you have been able to delve into this content so quickly and to find so many interesting connections and interesting ideas that we can hopefully explore in the not too distant future at TMA. I think it's fantastic, the perspective that you're bringing to the Antiquity collection. We do have a couple of comments here, and maybe Brittany, if you want to help me out a little bit, since a few more have popped in. A couple from Mr. Zawadzki. He is correct in noting that it'd be possible to have a kind of adjunct photography exhibit of ancient images, and that's very true. We have, and kind of thank you to Mr. Zawadzki, we have a really great collection of 18th and 19th century photography related back to antiquity, which I know that we are eager to kind of explore a bit more. Mr. Perry notes that inscriptions could also be an effective means of demonstrating multiculturalism in the ancient world. Oops, let's see.
Yeah, I saw that note coming by, and I like that suggestion. And it's, for instance, with the funerary altar of Dionysus, that because you can see his name, you can learn more about his Greek background. The name is not Latin. The family where he was a slave, the Kautilii, they have adopted a Latin name, but we know from other inscriptions that they originally were also slaves, but became very rich, bought their own freedom, or at one point received their own freedom. And it is possible that they came from Asia Minor. So yes, inscriptions are often the most direct way of tracing a family in the past. And papyri are another example. In Roman Egypt, there are papyri because the government from Rome wanted to get a good impression of how rich the province of Egypt was. And so there were census records kept. And some of these go back 5-6 generations.
Great. Another follow-up from Mr. Ryan, who notes that it is true that we arise and are from, that we are culturally indebted to Western societies, and that presentations can be diluted in unhelpful ways if the reach is too broad. I think that we are challenged to rethink this and invite greater representation on every level if TMA and other institutions are to speak to a larger multicultural audience who personally draw on many influences of which Western civilization is only a part. I imagine the school kid with Native American identity looking for his reflection in what we present. And I think that that's a very interesting comment. I think we're all across the board in all of our different areas of interest and specialty are looking at ways that we can become more inclusive in our research and scholarship and the exhibitions we present. And Branko, I thank you for presenting this topic today. I think it was quite fascinating, and I think that there'd be a wonderful way for us to connect it back to the contemporary programming as well at TMA. And then lastly, from Mr. Zawadzki again, he's just a follow-up to our conversation about Mr. Noble, that Noble was indeed interested in technique, and that there were, as you pointed out, many myths and themes in the collection, and just a note of kind of encouragement, and that we can work on filling all those gaps with myth, athletics, and sexuality.
The thing, of course, is that any collection will have gaps. That is just something that is obvious. If you are in the luxury of choosing which gaps you wish to fill, then the question is, what story do we want to tell with the objects in the collection, and what do we feel is missing? We can, of course, look at the details in what is missing in specifically the Greco-Roman collection, but you can also think, would we like to include objects from contemporary ancient societies that were not in Greece or Italy, but were in Persia or in Egypt? Would it be interesting to, in other words, broaden the horizon rather than to delve even deeper within a collection that is already there? Diluting the message is always a risk when you go broader. But there are already a few very nice Egyptian objects on display at the moment, so that would be an option. There are some nice Etruscan objects that are very close but still very different from the Roman and Greek world. And so this depends on what it is that you want to do in the museum, and the TMA is has no collection in Native American antiquities. If that is something that the museum would want, then I think there needs to be a thought about how would we acquire the expertise to incorporate that. That could be in a temporary exhibition, but if you want to become specialized in that field also, that will require more investment than just randomly adding objects to the collection. Are there any other questions coming in, Brittany?
There is one additional question from our director, Michael Tomar. Which of the 4 topics would you like to start with at the museum?
That's a question for me or a question for everyone in the audience?
Well, I think it's for you, but we are going to send a survey to that effect to our audience members, so we will get to hear their opinion as well.
Yeah, I would very much like to hear what the public feels about these exhibitions, and what the people in the museum, the docents, the staff, you guys all feel about this. So as not to bite off more than I can chew, I think that the Noble collection presentation that I gave, my second lecture, that is the one that we could start with, and perhaps even give an initial presentation next year, or as soon as there is an opening. The next step of that project was to send out objects, to have them examined scientifically, to present them in other museums together with locally performed research. And then after, let's say, 3 stops, bring the collection back and present all the scientific analysis that had been performed during that time, which would take, what, a year and a half or so. That is an idea that I think is very feasible. I could start with it any day. But yeah, I of course also did suggest all 4 because I really like them. I think that each of these ideas has wonderful opportunities for the museum. The first presentation that I gave, I became friends with Nikos Stratakis because of that. Which by itself is a wonderful thing, and I would really love for that exhibition to happen, whether it's in a year or 2, or in 4 or 5 years. I truly hope that that exhibition will be realized as well.
Fantastic. Well, I think with that, we will close out our lecture. Brittany, do you want to give one final plug for Branko's 30 on Thursday in January?
Yes. So join us on January 14th for our 30 on Thursday program. That takes place at 12:30 on a Thursday, and it's about a half-hour long program. I just put the link in the chat. Registrations are open, and Branko will be speaking to us about Egyptian queenship and that specific sculpture of a Ptolemaic queen from the museum's collection.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you all at the TMA and everyone attending today. Again, it was a great pleasure, and I hope to see you all soon in person.
Me too. Thank you so much, Branko.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Have a great Sunday. Bye-bye.